Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you, D'Angela and the team, for bringing us together in this way. I'm really excited to step into a space where I can explore Graffiti Bridge, which I never thought I would hear myself say because in November of 1990, when this film was initially released, I was not one who got it. Um, I remember the time being a period in which my consciousness was being shaped by academic study of critical racial justice and Black freedom movement texts like the ISIS Papers, Malcolm X Speaks, Stolen Legacy. I was deep in the readings of Frantz Fanon on the colonized mind. I was listening to Ice Cube and A Tribe Called Quest, coming off of Queen Latifah's work, exploring what it meant to have this sort of radical positioning in Black urban space, conversations between Public Enemy and X-Clan. My musical journey at that time was definitely more radical than the spirit in which Graffiti Bridge entered into this conversation. Even the movies that I was watching at the time were rooted in more of a hip hop sentiment, that were speaking to a Black experience that was entertaining and fun, but also critical of systems of oppression. And so, I remember Graffiti Bridge showing when I was a freshman in New York in college. And I asked my roommate if she wanted to come watch the movie with me. And honestly, it was not, I kept finding myself apologizing and saying that this is not a representation of the body of work that I had come to know. And then I realized, at that time, that I kind of stepped away from Graffiti Bridge because it just didn't speak to me at that time. Then I remember revisiting Graffiti Bridge when I entered into my late 30s. And that's the point when it started to take shape in my spirit as something worthy of deep appreciation. In my early years when it came out in 1990, the tone of Graffiti Bridge didn't match my demand for a more radical narrative, a more urgent narrative. But then I started to realize that nothing is more urgent than an unapologetic quest for love, and this extension of love as being something more than what might be immediately visible to our consciousness and to our open, naked eye. So, in this conversation, I wanted to talk a bit more, not just about the visualizations and vocalizations of love and this extended idea that came from Love Sexy of this interchangeable nature between love and God, but also to talk about the metaphors and symbolism that we see in the film that call us to a deeper space, where we see Glam Slam, as the potential womb that births new spiritual and musical opportunity, where we see Tevin as the son of Melody Cool, or a nod to the gospel and core R&B sounds that inform and are born of Black music and spirit. This discussion really is primarily of the metaphors and symbolisms interpreted through a lens of African indigenous wisdom. So, what do I mean by this African indigenous wisdom? Malidoma Patrice Somé wrote The Healing Wisdom of Africa, Finding Life Purpose Through Nature, Ritual, and Community. And, there's much to be said about the many ways in which Prince's character, the kid in Graffiti Bridge, the film, was calling upon what is later identified as this African indigenous wisdom through an inquiry of love, and through the plot of the film, where we see Kid moving along this journey of searching for his purpose and reconnecting to his source. Malidoma Patrice Somé writes in The Healing Wisdom of Africa that, driven by an internal fire that cannot be quenched, the modern consumer is like a greyhound racing for fulfillment. When this inner fire is not connected to its source, it drives people to race endlessly after things that do not matter. And so, in my exploration or reading of Graffiti Bridge in my sort of later years, I started to recognize that what Graffiti Bridge was actually trying to get us to understand was that we could explore love through different vantage points. And that is what I want to share with you a bit today. So let's start a bit with this idea of how Graffiti Bridge conceptualizes love. So we see here, when the kid, first sees Aura walk into the club. He's performing Elephants and Flowers. And he's actually wearing the checkered outfit that we see D'Angela wearing today, or in some way referring to that space. But when Aura walks into the club, Aura being the obvious representation of a divine feminine energy, we see him say the words, "Love the one who is love, the one who gives us power, the one who made everything, elephants and flowers, the one who will listen when all others will not. There will be peace for those who love God a lot." And, sort of stripping down the song just to the lyrics gives us an opportunity to explore, I think, what Prince wanted us to see as an opportunity to strip away some of the commercialization that had happened with music, the commercialization and conversations about love and making love versus being love, and also calling attention to something that he had said in an earlier interview when he said, "I was brought up in a black and white world. One day I was going to play all kinds of music and I wouldn't be judged by the color of my skin, but by the quality of my work." And so we see this really reflected visually in his fashion choices as well, right? Where in this scene, we can see this fashion choice as a reflection of a consciousness of division that he aspires to position as ephemeral, even as his styling in this scene is more ethereal, right? The flowing fabrics, the ribbon, in many ways, his styling, as always, is too perfect for this world. This conceptualization of love as a spiritual journey is something that, rather than solely a physical one, is further engaged when Aura says to Morris Day in the film, as he's trying to seduce her, "There isn't a man alive who truly understands the word," right? When she leans forward, she's kind of sort of slightly inebriated and says, to him, some calling to this concept that we see further articulated in 1 Corinthians 13 verses 4-8, when she says, when it says, "Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." Love in Graffiti Bridge, as I see it, is not violent. It's not a sexual assault. Sexual assault is a violent act, something that we see later in the film. This is an appeal to a more liberatory and capacious understanding of love. It is also something that calls to our attention, some of the values that are uplifted in what is referred to as the Black National Anthem, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." The last stanza of "Lift Every Voice and Sing" is rarely sung. When most people sing this at events and such, they stop with the first verse. There are two more verses, and this third verse is actually my favorite. And it says, "God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land." In his book, On Time, A Princely Life in Funk, Morris Day shares his own frustrations with the film Graffiti Bridge, namely that, quote, "Prince was once again the kid fighting me over the same chick. This time Aura replaced Apollonia. I wound up in a garbage heap. Prince wound up with the glamour girl, and the movie wound up disappointing fans and critics alike." End quote. This to me, while a simplistic synopsis of the plot, likely informed Morris's own personal concerns. It also speaks in many ways to Morris's character in Graffiti Bridge being a representation of one who is consumed by worldly values, separate and distinct in Christian traditions, from the spirit and godly world. But we also see that in the film is a representation of what it means to be drunk with the wine of the world. So, metaphorically drunk with the wine of the world in this plot, she's literally drunk when there is an attempt to impair her thinking and offer her a quote unquote pimp sandwich with Jerome. When Morris has this interplay with her saying, I'm a man, when she says, that there's no man who knows the meaning of love, he says, I'm a man, technically I'm alive, and I'd love to change your mind. And then later on that evening, Morris and Jerome threaten to sexually assault her, during which time Prince arrives to rescue her. But even in the story, as we see him coming in to take her away from them as they're about to engage in an act of rape and sexual assault, or what we would see as sexual assault, we see this rescue becoming something else, right? In fact, it left me wondering, were we actually seeing him rescuing her, or were we witnessing something else? So in this dream sequence, while she sleeps, he envisions making love to her as he asks her to be loved. We hear Joy in Repetition, which is my favorite song from the soundtrack. And we hear him repeat why can't you love me, baby? Come on and love me, baby. But it's more of a plea, right? Like, why can't you love me, baby? Come on and love me, baby. It's a scream and a plea in a way that we don't typically see play out in conversations about spirit and God. But what he's offering is for us to lose ourselves in an articulated manner, quote unquote, right? In which we make decisions about who to love, and how to avoid conflating love with lust. Love me is less about making love and more about being love. And so that led me to say, he isn't rescuing her. She's actually rescuing him. And then we end with this, sort of moment where we have just a few seconds to spend some time with this poem. And that calls us back to this question of what is just around the corner, right? We keep hearing it. I remember, being 19 in the theater, listening to this repetition of it's just around the corner and wondering what is just around the corner. I think D'Angela also asked that same question today during the panel. But what this poem says is it's just around the corner, it's just around the block. This love that you've been waiting for, a love solid as a rock, a love that reaffirms, and that you are not alone. Which led me to the understanding that we also see in Graffiti Bridge, this notion of love represented as grief. So in Indigenous practices, we see this conversation about grief being a very public communal experience. And we see this play out in many ways in the tension that Morris and the kid have in the plot of Graffiti Bridge. So when Aura says, 7 corners, 2 souls fight, one wants money, one wants light. It is a search for human wisdom and healing as a grand expression of love. Malidoma Somé wrote, the expression of grief in the presence of nature, brings not only healing, but in the end, a much stronger connection with nature and the spirits in nature that witness us. Feeling is the motor of action. It is the fire that moves us into doing things. It is also the teacher of human wisdom. So in some ways, Prince is calling attention to the kid's disconnection to Indigenous African wisdom in Graffiti Bridge's presentation of grief, where we see grief only, sort of both omnipresent and strangely invisible in Graffiti Bridge. We know that the kid is grieving his father, and later we see him engage in suicidal ideation. And we also see him look really sad when Aura's hit and, sort of representationally killed. But still, I see his presentation of grieving in isolation. The kid is almost always alone when he's grieving. As a contributor to this emotional instability in the film, going back to this question of purpose and this absence of deep connection, he's also, trying to figure out his healing modality through his purpose. So his healing becomes part of his creation of art. In both Purple Rain and Graffiti Bridge, it is loss, this love of this human spirit, this engagement of someone deeply close to him that produces his most transformational music. Grief allows for his creation of art produced by deep feeling and love. And then I want to talk a little bit too about community as love, because for me, love as literally around the corner is your community. It's in your family, it's in your elders, it's in your youth. So we see in, the sort of, Camila spoke a little bit about this when she talked about Mavis Staples as Melody Cool representing the legends, but also the community leadership that Black women hold. When Melody Cool steps out to the community and says, I've seen many bridges in my time, crossed every one of them with no trouble at all, right? She was standing in the space and power and spirit that we see elders hold in our community. It's rooted firmly in her faith, firmly in her vision, and totally consistent with the norms of Black mothers. And in this community where Prince is situated between the elders represented by Mavis Staples and George Clinton, and the youth represented by Tevin Campbell, these generational pieces that represent love, that demonstrate a capacity for growth, and that challenge us to be more than just caught up in the ways of the world or drunk with the wine of the world, and forget that we have this deeper connection to nature in a way that can be transformative. And so I wanted to close with Graffiti Bridge, though I think musically it is among the less popular songs on the album and in the film. The lyrics to Graffiti Bridge, again, read almost like a Negro spiritual, the fundamental basis for the rhythm and blues, jazz, rock and roll, funk, hip hop music that we enjoy today. And we see the search for a higher power as a journey that requires connection. And so I wanted to share all of that to say that I think it is a critical time. Let's see if I can get back on camera. It's a critical time for us to understand how we show up in this conversation about love in Graffiti Bridge, what the possibilities are for understanding it, and to recognize that it may have taken me a while, but I finally get it.